Hello, Sarah. This is a video presentation of the British Empire by Melde. The British Empire became fairly large with the ever-expanding American colonies in the 17th and 18th century, especially after the defeat of the French in the Seven Years' War. And here you can see a picture of the countries the British Empire has colonized through the times. For example, some parts of America and Canada, South Africa, Australia, and India being the biggest parts. Um, of these countries, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli called British India for the brightest jewel in the crown, and this was due to the amount of import Britain gained from India. They got a lot of jewels and spices, textile and oil from there. But it is also particularly because of the size of the colony and its geographical placement. It was the largest British colony of all time and also an important gateway to Asia in general. So the purpose of the British colonialism was, as it says, politically they wanted more influence, the more land, the more power in the world. And merchants were given money, and they were a lot stronger because they had a lot of land with a lot of different resources. So the Brits got a lot of money from the trading countries, and see, they expanded the British culture and spread their language all over the world, which made their state less able to die out and also made them more powerful. But the British colonialism came to an end, as most things do, and they lost most of their colonies after the First World War and the Second World War. Um, but after that, they left the newly founded countries with both good and bad outcomes, which you can see here. The British Empire had left them with very good infrastructure, education, medical care, and industrialization, and well, they gained a lot of money through trade. And the bad were that it made the government afterwards very poor, and there was a high risk of civil unrest in the countries. And after the Brits left, there were no people to trade with, so there was no money left to sustain the nation. Um, Other outcomes of the British colonialism from the Victorian age are, um, as you can see here, some good ones. The white people made their sanitary conditions a whole lot better, and they created or slash improved their infrastructure. Um, and some countries that were made by British colonialism are Canada and Australia, which are two great countries. Um, and the negative things, the British Empire forced democracy down the throats of their colonies, which now later on has been a complete disaster. In addition to this, they drew an artificial border in the colonized lands, creating groups of minorities. A very relevant example of this is both Nigeria and Ghana, where Boko Haram are now, and the trust in the democracy are very low in these countries, and their democracies are not very legit because of the corruption and so forth. Um, and looking back, one might wonder how it was possible for a fairly small country to gain such a huge empire. But they had a great and very big navy, and they used this to perfection through war, so it was possible for them to control these colonies. And the great legacy of the British Empire has also resulted in the well-known saying, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." And this is because the British Empire covered so much land and all around the globe, that no matter what time it was, there would always be sun somewhere in the British-ruled countries. And now to the analysis. And I've chosen to present a structuralist analysis on Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. Well, first off, The subject of the text is George Orwell, or the protagonist. The object is recognition, and the helper is the elephant and the orderly. The receiver is George Orwell, or the protagonist, and the opponent are the yellow faces and also the senders. Um, Now, second, to the Hollywood model. So the teaser is the conflict is briefly but interestingly introduced, which is the first section, and the Burmese people hate the authorities, which is presented in this part. The elaboration is the further introduction of the conflict and the themes, which is the second section, and he's George Orwell, or the first person's narrator, gets more personal and includes memories of his experiences in this country. And the point of no return is, sorry, an elephant in the village has gone must, and our protagonist knows his responsibility and what he must do. In the conflict escalation is when the protagonist is doubting whether or not he should kill the elephant, and climax is when he shoots it. The resolution is, of course, the aftermath. So, off to semantic fields. So, there's a lot of opposing components, so-called oxymorons, which you very often look for in the structuralist analysis method. And he, throughout the text, calls the indigenous people yellow faces and coolie, which means unskilled laborer, versus the white man and the Europeans, as he calls the British people. And there's a very racist generalized hostility towards the Burmese people, as said before, and he calls them this when he's talking about them in a negative way. Otherwise, he just refers to them as Burmese people or Burmans. And there's a quote, as you can see here on page 7. And opposing or contrast to the way he describes the Europeans, he describes them in a very neutral yet kind of superior way. And on this superficial layer, the Burmese people can't do anything. They're seen as nothing by the protagonist and the British people. They have no weapons, so they can't really defend themselves, but the British imperialists can. There's also a quote here. And imperialism is not good seen through the text. This is what George Orwell tries to portray. He sees the British imperialism as really bad, even though they defend the people from the East. This is how he sees it himself. This can be seen through his use of words such as tyranny, despotic government, and imperialism. And these words are often associated with aggressive policies and so forth. He believes it is very unnatural, evil, and cynical ideological convictions. Last, opposing components are the imperialists become the one who loses the freedom, which is very ironic, because on the superficial layer they have the power, and there is a quote to back this up. He believes that it is obvious to state that European imperialism and colonialism destroyed the freedom of the native populations, but Orwell's story points to the irony that the white man is also the enslaved one in different ways. Throughout the essay, the narrator, George Orwell, has not been acting on his own will, but to fulfill the idea of the white man's superiority. And in other words, he acts just like the Burmese people wants him to and expects him to. And this was all. Thank you.